Sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the only one standing between a man and the biggest mistake of his life. The morning sky above Seattle was clear enough to make every sheet of glass on the towering Park International headquarters shimmer like polished silver, and the city streets carried the steady rhythm of commuters beginning another ordinary weekday. Luxury sedans waited in perfect formation outside the private entrance, while security personnel communicated through discreet earpieces, checking every vehicle and every route with disciplined precision. Everything followed the same carefully rehearsed routine that had protected Ethan Park for years. As the youngest leader of one of the most influential Korean business families in America, Ethan inspired both admiration and caution wherever he appeared. Newspapers often described him as a brilliant executive with extraordinary instincts, while rumors insisted that powerful connections hidden beneath his respectable public image made very few people willing to stand against him. Whether those stories were true hardly mattered. His confidence alone was enough to silence most conversations whenever he entered a room. Dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit with a crisp white shirt and a dark tie, Ethan stepped through the revolving glass doors without slowing his pace. His expression remained calm, unreadable, and focused entirely on the schedule waiting ahead. Around him, assistants reviewed appointments, security officers scanned the surrounding sidewalks, and drivers stood ready beside immaculate black vehicles that reflected the bright morning sunlight. Among the dozens of employees quietly carrying out their responsibilities was Ava Brooks, a young black maid whose position rarely attracted anyone's attention. Every morning she arrived before sunrise, making certain executive offices, conference rooms, and private reception areas looked flawless before senior staff appeared. Most executives barely knew her name. Some never looked in her direction at all. Ava preferred it that way. She believed that doing excellent work without demanding recognition brought its own kind of dignity. That morning, however, something felt different from the moment she stepped outside with a small cart of freshly pressed linens. The air itself seemed strangely heavy despite the beautiful weather. She noticed one of the security vehicles parked slightly farther from its usual position. A delivery truck lingered longer than expected across the street. One of the drivers briefly checked his watch 3 separate times within less than a minute. None of those details proved anything by themselves, yet together they created an uneasy feeling she could not ignore. Ava tried convincing herself she was imagining patterns where none existed. After all, she was not a security expert, an investigator, or anyone whose opinion would normally influence the decisions of powerful people. She quietly continued toward the service entrance. But as Ethan Park descended the wide marble staircase surrounded by his security detail, that uneasy feeling suddenly tightened inside her chest with startling clarity. Without fully understanding why, she looked directly toward the sleek black sedan waiting at the curb. Every instinct she possessed urged her to stop him before he reached the passenger door. Ethan continued walking with the calm confidence of a man accustomed to complete control, never expecting anyone outside his inner circle to interrupt him. The guards opened a clear path ahead, while assistants hurried behind him carrying briefcases and digital tablets. Ava's heartbeat quickened. She knew that speaking now could cost her job before the day had truly begun. Yet remaining silent somehow felt even more dangerous. Before fear could silence her, she took one determined step forward, her voice carrying farther than she believed possible across the quiet entrance. "Mr. Park, don't get in that car." Every conversation stopped instantly, and for the first time that morning, Ethan Park slowly turned to face the maid who had just dared to interrupt him. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The morning traffic continued beyond the front gates, yet the entire entrance seemed frozen by the unexpected interruption. Ethan Park studied Ava Brooks without speaking. His expression revealed neither anger nor curiosity, only the calm restraint of a man who had spent years learning that silence often revealed more than questions ever could. Around him, members of his security team reacted immediately. 2 guards stepped between Ethan and Ava while another quietly positioned himself closer to the waiting sedan. Ethan's executive assistant lowered the tablet in her hands, clearly uncertain whether she had heard the young maid correctly. Employees standing near the glass entrance exchanged nervous glances. No one could remember a member of the housekeeping staff ever speaking directly to Ethan during the morning departure. much less stopping him in front of everyone. One of the senior security officers looked directly at Ava with visible disbelief. "Do you understand who you are talking to?" he asked in a firm but controlled voice. Ava swallowed, feeling dozens of eyes fixed on her, yet she refused to lower her gaze. "Yes, sir," she answered quietly. "That is exactly why I said it." The reply only deepened the confusion. Ethan slowly took one step forward until the guards instinctively moved aside to allow him through. He stopped several feet from Ava, close enough to notice that despite her obvious nervousness, she was not trembling. Her breathing remained steady. Her eyes showed concern rather than panic. "Explain," Ethan said calmly. It was a single word, spoken almost softly, yet everyone nearby understood it was not a request. Ava searched for an answer that would make sense, but the truth sounded impossible even to her. She had no evidence. She had heard no threat. She had seen no weapon. All she had noticed were small details that, together, left her with a feeling she could not ignore. "I cannot prove anything," she admitted. "I only know that something about today feels wrong. Please, choose another car." Several members of the security team exchanged skeptical looks. One driver shook his head almost imperceptibly. Another employee quietly whispered that fear and imagination often created unnecessary drama. Ethan listened without interrupting. He had built an entire career making decisions based on facts, not feelings. Every report he reviewed demanded evidence. Every business agreement relied on careful analysis. Nothing about the maid's explanation fit the way he understood the world. Yet something about her honesty prevented him from dismissing her immediately. She was not asking for attention. She was not making accusations. She was not attempting to impress anyone. If anything, she looked as though she regretted speaking at all. Ethan turned his attention toward the waiting sedan. It appeared exactly as it always had. The exterior reflected the morning sunlight, without a single visible flaw. The driver had served the company faithfully for years. Security officers had already completed their standard inspection before his arrival. Everything appeared perfectly normal. Still, Ethan did not open the passenger door. Instead, he glanced toward his head of security. "Inspect the vehicle again," he said evenly. The order surprised everyone standing nearby. The senior officer hesitated for only a fraction of a second before signaling his team. Two specialists immediately approached the sedan, opening every door, checking beneath the vehicle, examining the tires, the engine compartment, and the interior with practiced precision. Ava remained exactly where she stood, saying nothing further. She silently hoped she had been wrong. Losing her job would be far easier than discovering that the uneasy feeling inside her had been justified. Ethan folded his hands behind his back and watched the inspection unfold without revealing what he was thinking. Then, just as one of the technicians leaned toward the front passenger side for a closer look, an unexpected shout echoed from beside the vehicle, instantly replacing uncertainty with complete silence. The technician immediately straightened and raised one hand toward the rest of the security team. "Hold on," he called in a controlled voice. "Nobody touches the passenger side." Every conversation stopped. Ethan Park remained perfectly still, his attention fixed on the technician, who slowly crouched beside the front wheel and looked more carefully beneath the lower frame of the luxury sedan. Another specialist quickly joined him, using a small inspection mirror and flashlight, while speaking in a calm voice that revealed nothing to the growing crowd of employees watching from the entrance. Ava Brooks instinctively held her breath. She had no idea what they were seeing, only that the atmosphere had changed completely. Moments earlier, several people had quietly dismissed her warning as unnecessary fear. Now no one seemed willing to make another assumption. The head of security walked toward the technicians, knelt beside them, and examined the same area for several long seconds before standing again. His usually composed expression had become noticeably more serious. He turned toward Ethan and spoke carefully. "Sir, I recommend we move everyone back while we complete a full inspection." Ethan gave a single silent nod. The request alone told him more than a lengthy explanation ever could. Security personnel immediately established additional distance around the vehicle, politely directing employees farther from the entrance while maintaining complete professionalism. No one shouted. No one panicked. Yet the growing urgency was impossible to ignore. Ava quietly stepped backward, wondering whether she had somehow caused unnecessary disruption after all. She hoped the inspection would reveal nothing more than a harmless mechanical problem. Instead, after several tense minutes, the lead technician approached Ethan carrying a small electronic component sealed inside a transparent evidence bag. This was attached beneath the passenger side, he explained. We cannot determine its purpose here, but it does not belong to any factory equipment installed on this vehicle. Ethan studied the unfamiliar device without reaching for it. Around him, every member of the security team understood that the morning schedule had just become irrelevant. Whatever the object proved to be, someone had placed it there without authorization. The head of security immediately contacted outside specialists while ordering every company vehicle scheduled for the morning to undergo another complete inspection. The driver assigned to Ethan looked genuinely shocked. He insisted the sedan had remained inside the secured parking structure overnight and had followed standard procedures before arriving at the entrance. His confusion appeared sincere, making the discovery even more troubling. Ethan listened carefully before shifting his attention back toward Ava. She stood alone near the service walkway, clearly uncomfortable with the attention now surrounding her. She did not look relieved. She did not appear proud. If anything, she seemed deeply unsettled by the realization that her instinct had led to something real. Ethan slowly walked toward her while everyone nearby watched in complete silence. "Did you know about that device?" he asked calmly. Ava immediately shook her head. "No, sir. I have never seen anything like it." "Then why did you stop me?" Ethan continued. Ava hesitated before answering honestly. "Because every small detail this morning felt different. The delivery truck stayed too long. One driver kept checking his watch. Your car was parked a little farther from its usual place. None of those things meant anything by themselves, but together they made me feel that something was wrong. I could not explain it. I only knew I could not stay silent." Ethan remained quiet after hearing her answer. For the first time in many years, logic alone failed to fully explain what had just happened. The facts told him the unauthorized device had been discovered only because a quiet maid found the courage to interrupt him. Yet the greater mystery had only begun. How had she noticed what an entire professional security team had overlooked? And as investigators arrived through the front gate, while employees whispered among themselves, Ethan realized that learning the truth about Ava Brooks had suddenly become just as important as discovering who had placed the mysterious device beneath his car. Within 20 minutes, the private entrance that normally welcomed executives with quiet efficiency had transformed into a carefully controlled investigation site. Independent security specialists photographed every angle of the sedan, while technicians documented the unfamiliar electronic device before transporting it for laboratory analysis. Employees who had gathered out of curiosity gradually returned inside the building, yet whispered conversations followed them through every hallway. No one could understand how an ordinary housekeeping employee had sensed that something was wrong before an entire professional security division. Ethan Park remained inside a private conference room overlooking the entrance plaza. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he watched investigators complete their work with disciplined precision. His morning meetings had been postponed indefinitely, but surprisingly, that no longer occupied his thoughts. Instead, his attention repeatedly returned to the same question. Who exactly was Ava Brooks? He pressed a button on the conference table. Moments later, his chief of security, Daniel Cho, entered carrying a digital tablet filled with preliminary reports. "The specialists are still examining the device," Daniel explained. "At this point, they cannot confirm its purpose. It could be harmless electronic equipment, or it could have been intentionally placed there. Until we receive a complete analysis, we should avoid assumptions." Ethan nodded slowly. "And Ava Brooks?" Daniel opened another file. 28 years old. Born in Portland, Oregon. Graduated from a local community college with excellent academic records. No criminal history. No financial irregularities. Excellent employment references. She has worked here for almost 18 months without a single complaint or disciplinary action. Ethan listened quietly. The report sounded remarkably ordinary. Too ordinary. "Continue," he said. Daniel looked slightly puzzled. "There is not much else. She lives alone in a small apartment about 6 miles from here. Volunteers twice each month at a neighborhood food pantry. Her attendance record is nearly perfect. She rarely speaks unless someone speaks to her first." Ethan leaned back in his chair. Every line in the report described someone who valued stability, honesty, and routine. Nothing connected Ava to corporate espionage, organized crime, or any specialized security background. Yet none of that explained what had happened outside only an hour earlier. Have someone review the security recordings, Ethan instructed calmly. Not only from this morning. I want the past 30 days. Daniel looked surprised. You believe someone may have been watching you? Ethan shook his head. No. I believe someone may have overlooked her. Less than an hour later, several monitors displayed synchronized footage collected from cameras throughout the headquarters. Ethan personally watched as Ava appeared repeatedly over previous weeks. Every recording showed the same quiet pattern. She arrived early. She greeted coworkers politely. She completed her responsibilities with remarkable consistency. She never wandered into restricted areas. She never lingered near executive offices without purpose. She never displayed unusual curiosity about company operations. Nothing about her behavior suggested hidden motives. Yet one detail slowly captured Ethan's attention. In nearly every recording, Ava noticed small things before anyone else did. She quietly picked up a loose electrical cable before someone could trip over it. She alerted maintenance to a faint water leak long before it became visible. She redirected a delivery driver who had entered through the wrong loading dock without creating unnecessary embarrassment. None of those moments were dramatic enough to attract attention at the time. Together, however, they revealed an extraordinary pattern. Ava observed details that everyone else simply ignored. Ethan watched another recording in silence before finally speaking. She does not create problems, he said thoughtfully. She notices them before they become problems. Daniel folded his arms, considering the observation. That still does not explain today. Ethan agreed. No, it does not. At that exact moment, another member of the security team entered carrying a newly received laboratory update. His normally confident expression had disappeared. He placed the sealed report on the conference table, looked directly at Ethan, and quietly said, "Sir, the specialists have completed their first examination, and the results are nothing like we expected." Daniel Cho carefully opened the report and read the first page in complete silence. The room remained so quiet that the faint sound of rain beginning to fall against the conference room windows became impossible to ignore. After several long seconds, Daniel slowly lowered the document and looked directly at Ethan Park. The laboratory confirmed that the electronic device was not manufactured by the vehicle company, and it was not installed by our maintenance department, he said in a measured voice. More importantly, it was professionally concealed using specialized mounting equipment that would have been extremely difficult to notice during a routine inspection. Ethan accepted the report and examined every line himself. The technicians had deliberately avoided drawing premature conclusions, but one statement immediately stood out. The device had been attached recently, probably within the previous 24 hours. That single detail eliminated months of speculation and narrowed the timeline dramatically. Someone had gained access to one of the most closely protected vehicles in the company without attracting attention. Ethan closed the report and placed it back on the table. His expression remained composed, but Daniel had worked beside him long enough to recognize the seriousness hidden beneath that calm exterior. Increase security on every executive vehicle, Ethan instructed. Review every access log from the parking structure during the last 2 days. I want every contractor, employee, and visitor verified again. Daniel nodded immediately before leaving the room to organize the investigation. Ethan remained alone for several minutes, staring through the glass toward the city skyline. The mystery surrounding the device demanded answers, yet another question continued occupying his thoughts even more persistently. Ava Brooks had not discovered the object itself. She had simply recognized that something felt out of place long before anyone else noticed. That ability could not easily be explained by coincidence alone. Downstairs, Ava quietly returned to her regular duties after providing a formal statement to security investigators. She expected to be sent home or suspended until the investigation ended. Instead, she was instructed to continue her normal schedule while remaining available if additional questions arose. The unexpected decision did little to calm her thoughts. As she carefully arranged fresh flowers inside the executive reception area, several coworkers glanced toward her with expressions that mixed curiosity, admiration, and uncertainty. One employee whispered that she had probably saved the company's most important executive. Another wondered whether she had somehow known more than she admitted. Ava ignored every conversation. She wanted nothing more than for the day to become ordinary again. Late that afternoon, Ethan unexpectedly walked through the reception area without his usual group of assistants. He noticed Ava replacing a vase of white lilies near the entrance. She looked up, surprised to find him standing there alone. "Miss Brooks," he said politely. She immediately straightened. "Yes, sir." Ethan studied her for a brief moment before speaking again. "I reviewed your employment record." Ava's expression changed slightly. She feared she had somehow violated company policy despite her intentions. "Have I done something wrong?" she asked quietly. Ethan answered without hesitation. "No. According to everyone who has worked with you, you have done almost everything right." The unexpected response caught Ava completely off guard. Ethan continued. "Tomorrow morning, I would like you to join me for breakfast before work begins. There are several questions I would like to ask, and I believe a conversation will tell me far more than another background report." Ava blinked in surprise. She had never shared a meal with any executive in the building, much less the man who owned the company. "If you would prefer not to," Ethan added calmly, "you may decline. This is not an order." Before Ava could decide how to answer, Daniel hurried into the reception area, carrying his phone with unmistakable urgency. He stopped beside Ethan and quietly said, "Sir, another incident has just been reported at the secondary parking facility, and I believe Miss Brooks will want to hear this as well." Daniel lowered his voice as several employees walked past the reception area. "One of our supervisors just reported unusual activity at the secondary parking facility on the east side of the property," he explained. "A maintenance employee noticed someone attempting to leave through a restricted service exit after business hours. When security approached, the individual abandoned a company identification badge that does not belong to anyone currently employed here." Ethan Park accepted Daniel's phone and quietly reviewed the photographs that had already been transmitted from the scene. The abandoned identification badge appeared authentic at first glance, yet the serial number belonged to an employee who had retired nearly 4 years earlier. Whoever had entered the property had prepared carefully. Ethan handed the phone back without changing his expression. "Seal the entire parking facility," he instructed. "Nobody leaves until every access record has been verified." Daniel immediately nodded and walked away, issuing instructions through his communication headset. Ava Brooks remained standing beside the reception desk, uncertain whether she should excuse herself or wait for further instructions. Ethan looked toward her once again. "Would you mind coming with me for a few minutes?" he asked politely. Ava hesitated only briefly before agreeing. He led her to a quiet conference room overlooking the rain-covered courtyard where neither reporters nor curious employees could interrupt them. A warm pot of tea had already been placed on the table earlier that morning, untouched since the investigation began. Ethan poured 2 cups before taking a seat across from Ava rather than at the head of the table. The simple gesture surprised her. She had expected another formal interview, not a conversation. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I have reviewed every report available about you," he said calmly. "None of them explained today." Ava lowered her eyes toward the cup in her hands. "I'm not sure I can explain it either." Ethan listened without interrupting. "When I was growing up," Ava continued softly, "my father repaired elevators, electrical systems, and old buildings throughout Portland. He always told me that nothing fails without giving small warnings first. Loose sounds, tiny vibrations, things that most people ignore. He made me stop and observe everything before making conclusions. He believed careful attention could prevent problems long before anyone else noticed them." Ethan remained silent, allowing her to continue. "After school, I spent years helping him on weekends. He never taught me security. He never taught me investigations. He simply taught me to notice when ordinary things stopped behaving in ordinary ways." Ava smiled faintly at the memory. "He used to say that the world whispers before it shouts." Ethan repeated the sentence quietly to himself. It was remarkably simple, yet it perfectly described what he had seen in the surveillance recordings. Ava did not possess extraordinary abilities. She possessed extraordinary patience. While most people rushed through each day, she paid attention to details that everyone else dismissed. "This morning," she admitted, "I could not identify one specific danger. It was only the feeling that too many small things were wrong at the same time. I knew I might lose my job by speaking, but if I stayed silent and something happened, I would never forgive myself. Ethan looked through the rain-covered window for several thoughtful seconds. Every successful decision he had made throughout his career relied upon gathering information that others overlooked. Perhaps that was why Ava's explanation felt unexpectedly familiar. Before he could respond, Daniel opened the conference room door with visible urgency. "Sir," he said, breathing slightly faster than usual. "We just completed a review of yesterday's security recordings. There is one person who appears near your vehicle twice, but according to company records, that person has never worked for Park International." Daniel immediately connected his tablet to the large conference room display, and a still image from the security cameras appeared on the screen. The picture showed a man wearing a gray maintenance uniform, a reflective safety vest, and a company identification badge clipped neatly to his shirt. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about him. He blended naturally with dozens of contractors who entered and exited the property every week. The timestamp revealed that he had walked through the executive parking structure the previous afternoon, nearly 18 hours before the unusual device had been discovered beneath Ethan Park's sedan. Another image appeared beside the first. The same individual was seen returning to the exact parking area 43 minutes later. But this time, he was carrying an ordinary-looking equipment case that had not appeared in the earlier recording. Daniel enlarged the photographs, yet the man's face remained partially hidden beneath the brim of a work cap and the angle of the surveillance camera. "We checked every contractor assigned to the building yesterday," Daniel explained. "No maintenance company recognizes him. The identification badge he used was professionally duplicated from a legitimate contractor who had finished work 3 weeks ago." Ethan studied both images without speaking. Whoever had entered the property had carefully planned every movement. There was no sign of panic, hesitation, or confusion. The individual walked with the confidence of someone who expected to belong there. Ava Brooks quietly observed the screen from across the table. Something about the second image caught her attention almost immediately. She narrowed her eyes before taking one cautious step closer. "May I see that picture again?" she asked softly. Daniel looked surprised, but replayed the recording without objection. Ava watched the footage several times. The mysterious man entered the frame, adjusted the equipment case in his left hand, briefly looked toward the executive elevators, then disappeared behind a support column before reappearing moments later. Most people would have focused on the disguised face. Ava looked somewhere else entirely. "Can you stop it right there?" she asked. Daniel paused the video. Ava pointed toward the equipment case. "Yesterday morning, our maintenance team replaced every standard tool case with new blue models because the old gray ones were recalled after defective latches caused several accidents." She looked toward Daniel. If he really worked here yesterday afternoon, why was he carrying one of the older cases? The conference room fell silent. Daniel quickly opened another file containing maintenance records. Less than a minute later, he slowly looked up from the tablet. "She is right," he admitted. "The replacement happened yesterday before noon. Every authorized technician signed for a new case." Ethan shifted his attention toward Ava. Once again, she had noticed something everyone else had overlooked. It was not luck. It was observation. Daniel immediately contacted the investigation team and requested that every contractor entering the property during the previous week be reviewed again using the newly identified detail. The search criteria changed instantly. Instead of looking only for faces, investigators began looking for outdated equipment that should no longer have been on company property. Within minutes, several additional camera angles were located. The disguised man had appeared briefly near 2 separate service entrances before disappearing beyond the camera coverage. Although his identity remained unknown, the investigation suddenly had a much stronger direction. Ethan slowly closed the tablet and turned toward Ava. "Miss Brooks," he said with genuine respect that had not existed only hours earlier. "From this moment forward, I would like you to remain near the executive offices until this investigation is complete. Not because you are under suspicion, but because your perspective has already helped us twice in a single day." Ava looked genuinely surprised. "Sir, I am only a maid." Ethan offered the faintest smile. "No," he replied quietly. "You are someone who sees what the rest of us forget to notice." Before Ava could respond, Daniel's phone rang once more. He answered immediately, listened for several seconds, and his expression changed. Looking directly at Ethan, he lowered the phone and said, "Sir, the investigation team just identified where the unknown man went after leaving our property, and his destination was far more personal than any of us expected." Daniel lowered his phone slowly, as though he needed a moment to process what he had just heard before speaking. Ethan Park remained completely composed, but the silence inside the conference room grew noticeably heavier. Ava. Brooks watched both men carefully, sensing that whatever Daniel had learned had changed the direction of the entire investigation. "Our investigators recovered additional traffic camera footage," Daniel finally said. "After leaving this property, the unidentified man did not disappear into the city as we expected. Instead, he drove directly to the neighborhood where Miss Brooks lives." Ava stared at him in disbelief. "My neighborhood?" she asked quietly. Daniel nodded. "The vehicle remained there for almost 30 minutes before leaving. We are still reviewing the surrounding cameras, but at this point we cannot determine whether he was watching your apartment, meeting someone, or simply passing through." Ethan's attention immediately shifted toward Ava. Until that moment, he had assumed she might have become an accidental witness to someone else's plan. Now an entirely different possibility emerged. If the unknown individual had deliberately gone near Ava's home, then perhaps she had never been a random observer at all. Perhaps someone else had already noticed her long before she realized it herself. Ava searched her memory, trying to remember anything unusual from the previous evening. At first, nothing came to mind. She had finished work, stopped at a neighborhood grocery store, and walked the familiar 3 blocks to her apartment building. Everything had seemed completely ordinary. Then a small detail surfaced. "There was a delivery van parked across from my building," she said slowly. "It stayed there longer than normal, but I assumed the driver was making deliveries." Daniel immediately wrote down the information while another investigator listening through the conference call began checking city traffic records. Ethan remained thoughtful. Over the past several hours, he had watched Ava solve problems simply by remembering details that everyone else overlooked. He had learned enough to trust her instincts, even when they seemed insignificant at first. "Until we understand this situation," Ethan said calmly, "you should not return home alone." Ava immediately shook her head. "Sir, I cannot ask the company to rearrange everything because of me." Ethan answered without hesitation, "You are not asking. I am deciding." His tone remained respectful, but it carried the quiet certainty that accompanied every important decision he made. Daniel agreed immediately. Temporary accommodations could be arranged inside one of the company's secured executive residences, a property normally reserved for international business guests. Ava hesitated. Accepting such an offer felt impossible. She had spent her entire career trying not to inconvenience anyone, and now the owner of the company was personally changing security procedures because of her. Before she could respond, Daniel's tablet signaled another incoming update. He opened the message and silently reviewed several newly enhanced images captured from a traffic camera near Ava's apartment. The software had improved the clarity enough to reveal the rear window of the suspicious vehicle. A small parking permit hung from the mirror, displaying the name of a private storage facility located less than 15 minutes from Park International headquarters. Investigators immediately searched the company's recent visitor records. Less than 2 minutes later, another match appeared. The same storage facility had rented a unit only 6 days earlier using identification documents that investigators now believed were fraudulent. Ethan rose from his chair and walked toward the rain-covered window overlooking the city. For the first time since the morning began, he felt that the unknown individual had made a mistake. Careful planning had hidden the person's identity, but one overlooked parking permit had opened an entirely new path. He turned back toward Daniel. "Prepare a team," he said calmly. "We visit that storage facility tonight." As Daniel left to organize the operation, Ava quietly looked toward the photographs one last time, and a sudden, uneasy feeling returned. Her eyes settled on one object resting inside the suspect's vehicle, an object no one else in the room had mentioned, and she realized with growing certainty that the man had not finished whatever he originally came to do. The investigation team arrived at the private storage facility just after sunset, moving with quiet efficiency while local authorities secured the surrounding area. Ethan Park remained inside the lead vehicle with Daniel Cho and Ava Brooks. reviewing the final surveillance photographs before anyone entered the building. Ava continued studying the enlarged image displayed on the tablet. Then she gently pointed toward the passenger seat of the suspect's vehicle. "That notebook," she said softly. "Everyone has been looking at the driver, but no one noticed the notebook." Daniel enlarged the image again. A weathered black notebook rested beside the driver's seat with several colored tabs visible along its edge. "Why does that matter?" he asked. Ava answered without hesitation. "Construction supervisors use those color tabs to organize inspection schedules. My father carried one exactly like that for years. If this man was pretending to be maintenance personnel, he probably studied construction sites or building layouts long before coming here." Investigators immediately searched the rented storage unit after obtaining the necessary authorization. Inside, they discovered no dramatic confrontation, only carefully organized evidence that revealed months of planning. Shelves contained duplicate contractor uniforms, outdated company identification badges, printed maps of service entrances, maintenance schedules gathered from public sources, and handwritten observations describing employee routines. The notebook from the surveillance photograph was also recovered. Its pages were filled with detailed notes about delivery times, security patrols, contractor rotations, and executive travel patterns. Yet one page stood apart from all the others. Across the top, someone had written a single sentence: "The maid notices everything." The room fell completely silent. Ethan slowly read the words again before closing the notebook. Whoever had organized the operation had been observing him, but they had also been observing Ava. Long before she realized anything was unusual, someone else had recognized her remarkable attention to detail. Daniel quietly looked toward Ava. "You were never supposed to become part of this investigation," he said. "You became part of it because you refused to ignore what everyone else ignored." The recovered materials provided investigators with enough information to continue identifying the people responsible, and over the following weeks, the remaining questions were answered through careful investigation and cooperation with law enforcement. Security procedures across Park International were strengthened, contractor verification systems were modernized, and every executive vehicle received additional layers of inspection. Many employees assumed the greatest lesson from those events involved technology or security. Ethan understood differently. 1 week later, he invited Ava to breakfast exactly as he had promised. This time there were no investigators, no reports, and no urgent phone calls. The quiet dining room overlooked the gardens behind the executive residence as morning sunlight reflected across the trees. Ethan poured coffee before looking at Ava with sincere appreciation. "You changed the way I evaluate people," he said. "For years I believed experience alone created good judgment. You reminded me that humility matters just as much." Ava smiled gently. "My father always believed that every person notices something different. He used to tell me that wisdom begins when people start listening to one another." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Then I have been learning something important." Before leaving the table, he handed Ava a small envelope. Inside was not a financial reward, but an offer to join a newly established executive operations team responsible for workplace safety, employee observation programs, and facility improvement initiatives. "You earned this because of your character," Ethan said. Ava looked up with genuine surprise. "I have never led anything like that." Ethan smiled warmly. "Neither had I when someone first trusted me." As they stepped outside together beneath the clear Seattle sky, the company headquarters looked exactly as it had before, yet everything had quietly changed. Employees greeted one another more carefully, supervisors listened more closely, and one quiet maid who had once been nearly invisible now walked forward with new confidence, proving that true influence rarely begins with power. It begins with the courage to speak when everyone else remains silent, and with the wisdom to notice what others choose to overlook.